if you have a questions, finding the answer, if the answer exists, is a lot easier nowadays with AI. But I do think that what is hard is like coming up with the right questions. So that made me realize it's like, okay, as a writer, as a technical communicator, that I need to be able to like think through things and come up with like ask the right questions.
All right, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the TWIML AI podcast. I am your host, Sam Charrington, and today I'm joined by Chip Huyen. Chip is an independent AI researcher. Before we get going, be sure to hit that subscribe button wherever you're listening to today's show. Chip, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Sam. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. Oh, by the way, I'm like independent researcher in general. AI is just like one of the things I'm interested in.
Awesome. Well, it is great to connect. It's been a little while, I think a couple of years since we last spoke. And obviously, a lot has happened in the world of AI since then. Maybe you can catch us up on what you've been up to. I think you were just starting Claypot at the time when we spoke. You were getting into real time and some other things. What's been new for you for the past couple of years?
Yeah. So we started Claypot AI, and then we sold the company last year, and then stay on with the acquirer for a while just to like for things to settle. And this year, and after that's why we like unemployed for this year, and I'm pretty, really unhappily, sorry, pretty happily unemployed. Not like I guess it's better than like unhappily employed. But yeah, it's been pretty good. Yeah, and yes, just I think this year I feel like it's been the last few years have been pretty intense, especially with like running a startup and then with all this craziness about AI. So this year I just decided it's like let's just try to pursue my interest and see where they take me, and try not to have like a lot of like deadlines and expectations and like goals. Uh, wow, it does sounds like I do sound like a bit lazy, don't I?
Not at all. And I don't think anyone that follows you would call you lazy. You just had a book come out. From that book, you just posted a really interesting post about agents, and we'll be digging into that topic. Maybe we can start though with independent researcher. Tell me, do you structure that in any way? You were specific to call out that it's not AI. What are some of the other things that you're researching?
Mm, I think of AI as a tool, and it's definitely a very fascinating tool. It's really hard to avoid AI nowadays. It's just like I have this test, like if I go to a party, how long until somebody bring up AI? It's just like in the first 5 minutes. Like it's really impossible to escape it. So definitely AI has to be a part of it, but I'm interested in like problem solving. So there are several problems I'm interested in, and I just want to see like how to solve these problems. And if AI is part of the solution, it's great. But if not, I'm very happy. I would like be very happy to look into other directions too.
What are some of those key problems that you're interested in?
Um, so one thing is just like I think that's the way people read and write and learn is going to be so different. So when I was writing the book, my book, I read a lot of papers, like a lot. Like I think my book has about reference alone, like about like over 1,000 links, and of them is like 400 something, so like archive papers. So that is only the papers I referenced in the book, and I read a lot more that were not referenced. So, and it's a process of reading these papers. I realized that the way I read has changed. So, for example, in the past, right, I would like read the abstract, I read the conclusions, discussions, and then I skim through the paper. But now it's just like I felt myself like with AI, I become a lot like the time it takes for me to read a paper like is a lot less. Like I could read the abstract still, but then like the most of it I would like throw into like ChatGPT or like Claude, and then I start asking questions. So one thing I usually ask is like, especially for me, understand a new technology better in comparison to like the old technologies. So like if there's a new technique coming out, I would like, okay, but how is it different? How is it improvement? Like, and why does it work compared to the last techniques, right? So I would like put 2 papers or 3 papers into like ChatGPT and ask to at least to explain to me like how is that an improvement or like why from the previous ones. And I was doing it. I was just like, okay, if I don't read things like end to end anymore, then why do I write things from end to end? You know, like why do I write the whole thing people like that? So it does make me think about like what kind of writing is harder to automate. And then I realized something is that like first, if you have a questions, finding the answer if the answer exists is a lot easier nowadays with AI. Like yeah, for example, if you ask it to explain like what is X, you ask ChatGPT, it can come up with like 1,000 of different definitions. Like it can explain to you as if you were five. It can explain to you as if you were like I don't know a dancer or like I don't know. It's really good at coming up with explanations or definition for you. But I do think that what is hard is like coming up with the right questions. So that made me realize it's like okay, as a writer, as a technical communicator, that I need to be able to like think through things and come up with like ask the right questions. So I'm less pressured in like asking like trying to like define things or explain things. I mean like I still want to do a good job at it, but I mean I'm a lot more concerned with like thinking through things, like structure things, asking the right questions. So that is one of the interests you asked me. Yeah. But yeah, I do I'm interested in like learning, educations, maybe like information consumptions in general.
That makes me think a little bit about this joke that we've heard or seen come up a lot recently, which is, people spending a lot of time using ChatGPT to help them, take their little blurb and expand it into something formal, and then people on the other side are taking that formal thing and expanding it back into little blurbs or bullets. Um, how do you see that evolving communication?
I do think that it will change a lot in the way we communicate or the way we interact with each other. So the way of communications, so one example is just like the search engine speak. It's just like people have to start like learning how to like type, like get a like ask search engine, yeah, Google, so you get the right thing. And perhaps start learning to like talk like that with like ChatGPT. One is it's very interesting. So I have a friend who has like a quarantine, a COVID baby, right? So the kids like spend the first like 2 years being very isolated with just the parents, a nanny and Alexa. And when she was free, like I noticed that she talked a little bit like with people the way she could talk with Alexa. She'd be like, "Mom, get me this. Dad, get me this." Right? It's just like so I felt like we can see that. So I have no doubt that's like we interact more with AI wouldn't change the way. Or like in San Francisco, have you seen that people like have already started bullying self-driving cars? It's because like you know that like self-driving car would always stop for you to cross the street. So when you see self-driving car, people was like, okay, I'm just gonna cross now. I don't have to wait for the crosswalk, right? Or like sometimes I was just like, that's annoying. I think I'm not saying I did it. I'm not saying some of my friends did it. I just like to see self-driving cars like let's annoy the self-driving car. Like given that there's no one inside. But I feel like I think it definitely changed. One thing I'm actually really curious about is that I've seen like a few companies that provide AI companionship, and I think I was very very so I was s- able to like see some of the data, and it's a little bit crazy like how much time people spend on like chatting with AI. Like it's really insane. If you go first of all, I think you can see some of it if you go to like some subreddit of like character AI or like some others, and it's just like people spend a lot of time talking with AI, and it just made me feel like let's imagine like you are younger today, right? You were like and then like maybe like not maybe you're like in the teens or like tweens or like pretty young, and you spend a lot of time talking with this AI, and you're so used to like AI like just accommodating you, like just saying exactly what you want to hear, like always be there for you. Then how was that experience compared to talking to humans? Like, why would I bother to talk to humans who I cannot program, who I cannot like, who just say things I don't want to hear? So it just makes me feel like, how is it gonna be in the future? But anyway, I'm not sure. I don't remember what our question was. I just like went into a rant.
Yeah, no, we were talking about the question was how you think uh, our interaction with AI, and more specifically, I was asking about our use of AI tools would change communication. kind of reflecting on that loop that you used in reviewing the papers, how that has shifted and how your writing has shifted. Um, did to what degree beyond using the ChatGPT and Claude to summarize papers, what other AI tools did you use in the writing of the book?
Oof. I use a lot of it. Not a lot of tools. I just say I use some tools a lot of times. So I actually did I use ChatGPT and Claude. So and also use like something like okay, I don't watch I feel like it's weird mentioning those names because it's like promotions. I do use a few other tools just like heavy editing, like catching like, just like general writing assistant. And I just like recently like just exported ChatGPT. And like I found out like during the period of writing the book, I had about like 3,000 conversations with ChatGPT. So a lot of them is not just like summarize paper, comparing paper, but also like do data analysis. So yeah, so like just trying to understand or like help me like create a graph or like just brainstorm like ways of like how to explain the concept, like some validating ideas. I use Claude a lot because one of the interests I have right now is to write a math novel, which I really want to do, but I felt like there's pretty no market for it. But I just like math. I think math is very beautiful, and people keep asking me like, "Hey, is there like any like I did competitive math for a while when I was a child, like 10 years. And I think it's like people will keep asking me, hey, is competitive math useful? I do study like number theory and stuff. I do use it nowadays. And I feel like a lot of it probably not. But I do think it's like mathematical thinking is like really, really important. And I just want to write like a kind of novel to like just like about like how beautiful math is. And I did use like Claude and ChatGPT just like to like help me like think through the character development. Is that realistic? Like, is that probable? And like coming up with like examples because sometimes it's like it's pretty. They are both pretty good at coming up with examples. And in the process, I found out it's like it's pretty useful for like writing a book on AI as well because I learned a lot about like what they are good at and what they are not good at, and also like just in general, just helping understanding, have giving more ideas. So it's gave me a bunch of ideas about different benchmark you can decide, like how to evaluate different capabilities of these different models. Because for one example, right, like script writing, I was talking to someone at like Anthropic, and that person told me it's like, oh, Claude is really good at script writing, and I'm just like, how do you know? Do you have like internal benchmark for it? And this person was like, no, people on Twitter told me so. And I'm like, even if people who are really good at it, really smart, right? And apparently, like, this kind of thing is like quite important to them. I still don't have benchmark to measure things like that. Then how, like, it must be like really hard. And that's made me think about like how we can like design like benchmarks to evaluate things like script writing or storytelling. Yeah, so I have been like thinking about like a different approaches to like benchmark design. So that's one of the things I want to pursue in my like leisure time or like unemployed period.
Nice, nice. Well, let's jump into the book a little bit. The title of the book is AI Engineering. The book is mostly about generative AI as opposed to, other, traditional machine learning, for example. Maybe start by why'd you call it AI engineering as opposed to something around generative AI or any number of things that you cover in the book. What does AI engineering mean to you?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, and I did agonize over it a lot over the name quite a bit. So I think it's like first was like should we stimulate like machine learning engineering like because like machine learning engineering has been around for a while. And I do think that's why there are a lot of overlap and like a lot of the foundational things that we know from AI engineering can be applied. AI like foundation models do come with a lot of new things that I do think it's like we need to talk about those new things. So we do need something to separate AI engineering, like this new thing from like traditional ML engineering. And there were a lot of terms flying around. Like some people tell me like LM ops, some people like AI ops, right? And I was like, I didn't really want to use the words that end with ops because I do think it's like a lot. This is a lot less operations about this, right? It's a lot more
If
engineering.
everything's behind the service, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I think there's a lot of more creativity, like more problem solving. It's like it's a lot more. I'm not saying operation is not fun. I'm just saying this can be a lot more fun. So I did ask a bunch of people. So at that time, I think I knew quite a few of people who were already building like really cool applications with generative AI, and I asked them like, so how would you code what you're doing? And they were like AI engineering. So after I got like 20 people saying that, I'm just like, okay, I'm just gonna go with what people call it. I'm not gonna pick my own. So
Interesting, interesting, interesting. And one of the topics that you cover in the book is agents. Before we dig into some of the way you're thinking about agents nowadays, I'm curious about your meta thinking about agents, and that is, I see a lot of debate raging on the social medias about whether agents are a thing or whether agents are just kind of rebranded LLMs. Like LLMs plus tools is, now we're calling that agents. How you know assuming you kind of have thought about that a bit, how do you think about that? And do you think, kind of referring back to your comment earlier about asking the right question, do you think that's an interesting question, or is it, just kind of throwaway social media fodder and there are more interesting questions to ask about this? And what are those questions?
I think it's an interesting question, and I really want to go into this. But can we just I just want to end the thought on like the engineering versus ML engineering, and then we go into agent because I
Yeah,
feel
sure.
like we're gonna be spending a lot of time talking about it. So so yeah, so just on the note of like engineering and ML engineering. So I don't think they are like mutually exclusive. So I do think just like in the vast majority of generative AI system I have seen, it's just not like an generative AI or traditional ML, a classical model. It's like it's both. So for example, you build like a customer support chatbot, right? Like so, you have a request from like a customer before sending the request to like the AI model. You might want to have like a intent classification to see like what the request is about. Maybe it's just something like easy you can answer with an FAQ. Yeah, so a router, so that you can build with like a classical machine learning model or like as a scorer, right? Like after you get a response back from AI, you may want to say, "Hey, is that safe? Does it contain PII? Right? Does it reveal anything it shouldn't say? Or like whether it's good enough or not?" So you can also build those scorers with classical ML. So I do think it's like it's very they do go hand in hand. So in a lot of organizations, I see that they have the same team for engineering and ML engineering, and in some organizations they like separate them out. But I do think it's like for anyone who want to build like solutions to real world problems, maybe like complex problems, it's very likely that person would need both like traditional ML engineering and engineering. And I think like the terminologies, I don't think we do. I don't. Yeah, I don't think we need to get hung up on the terminologies because even the same role title at different companies can mean very different things. Even the same company, like the same title, can like do very different things. Yeah, so I think just to close out that thought. And okay, next we talk about agents, right?
And in contrast, while we don't need to get caught up in terminology about ML engineering versus AI engineering, it sounds like you do think the terminology around agents is interesting.
So, do you know, have you had this feeling? It's like you like something, but just hate the way it's called. Yeah, so like I just traveled to Vietnam recently with my friend and he was just like, I realized this dish, like this like very tasty, like over the charcoal Vietnamese snack. But then people try to sell the tourists and call it like Vietnamese pizza. And he was like, why would you call it something so tasty Vietnamese pizza? Like totally not that. So anyway, so it's just about the naming. But yeah, so um I think a lot of people don't like the word agent. And a lot of people is like, oh, like you said, it's like, what is agent? Is a new thing or just like LM plus tools? For me, I try not so I try to avoid debate on naming because I feel like so first of all, one thing I really hate about being a writer, like I love writing, but one thing I really hate to write is like definitions. Because I feel like no matter how I define something, someone's gonna get upset. Because it will never be like good enough. Yeah. So I think like so I did have a sections on agents in my book, and I went with agents because that's what people like, a lot of people call it. So I know a lot of people don't like it, but it's only something that people call it. And agent by itself is not like a new term. And I have a lot of friends who just like really hate the term. And they were just like, there are already so many things with the name agent. Like I have like reinforcement learning agents, you have like user agents, you have like a lot of different kind of agents, right? Like what is this like agent? So I did go through like a lot of like reading like AI books, like some classic books on AI and see how they define agent. And I think like definitions I quite like is that like agent is anything that can interact or like that can perceive the environment and interact with the environment.
Some
So that
Peter
means it's
Norvig
like
book,
yes, yeah. So it's a great book by the way.
which is
Um,
written mid 90s, like
yeah,
to underscore the idea that this is not a new concept.
yeah, no, no, definitely. So an agent itself, right? So it has to persist the environment. So this means the agent has to operate in an environment. So for example, a coding agent, it operates inside maybe coding, maybe like in VS Code or like in terminal, right? Or like if it's ChatGPT is an agent that operates maybe on the internet, right? It can like browse the internet. It can also like um answer a question that you interact with it through the internet. So and then to like interact with the environment, you will need like be able to perform a set of actions. So a lot of things I've interact with nowadays are already agent. Like ChatGPT is certainly an agent, right? Like the action it can do is just like execute code, browsing web, use a calculator, like even generate image or retrieve image. So like there are a lot of things ChatGPT can do already, in similar as Claude. So agent is already here. But the capability of an agent, a lot of it is not what people hope for yet. So maybe people think it's like, oh, agents was like, yes, it sounds cool and all. Like you want to have something autonomous that can have you do a lot of things. But maybe the promise is like the actual capability is not quite where people want it to be yet. But the question is, it's like how far or how big is the gap? And I'm pretty bullish on the improving capability. So I do think that the capability of an AI power agent depends on two things. One is a set of tools it can get access to, and the second is ability to like leverage those tools to like solve problems. And the second aspect, we can call it planning, right? Like given a task from a user, how does a patient think? How does the agent think about using the tools to like solve the task, may come up with like a sequence of actions, like a roadmap, like to get the goal, and maybe determine whether the goal has been accomplished, right? So so for the tool, so I think like a lot of agent like what we use today LMs is like we think of them not as agent because they have very limited set of tools. But they have tools, right? So but I do think it's like the more tools we give AI models, the more powerful they're gonna become. However, using tools well, like require a lot of like capability, like it's a lot easier to like be able to like, use two or three tools well. It's a lot harder to like use like 3,000 tools well. So I have some like personal benchmark, and I think it's like I just like I want to see like how well a model can use like different number of tools. And in my personal, just like not peer review, just want to put it out there. It's like personal benchmark. I feel like AI model fails like very very quickly with the number of tools like increases. So like the planning capability of AI has been so like improved. People to use those tools well and I solve the task well. And I'm
Can I
yeah.
ask you a question about this? Your non-peer reviewed research study on tool use. Have you looked at, like, it strikes me that an interesting factor would be like the semantic distance between the tools. Like if there are a bunch of tools that are closely related to another, inches to millimeters, millimeters to inches,
Yeah.
inches to feet, that kind of thing. And then like a recipe tool, like maybe there's more confusion around the things that are closely related, and less confusion around things that are different, or maybe it's the opposite. I don't know. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that based on what you've played around with so far.
I think it's a very good research questions. So in my benchmark, a lot of tools are like not quite similar. There's a range of different tools, but I do think this is a school like a very subset of papers I've read. That's like does go into like what kind of um not just what kind of tools. Like there's a high abstraction, a higher level of abstraction than that. So let's say it's like okay, let's say like you write code, right? Write code and you it's an abstraction, and then lower you're gonna hey write Python code, write C code, or like writing codes, right? So this when you ask AI to generate a plan, you can either ask it to generate a very high level plan, a very granular plan, right? It's just like you're planning a quarterly planning, you can do like monthly planning or like weekly planning. So, so I think there's this different study on like how good the generated plans can be, like with different level of like granularity. And also there's a question of like you can ask some model to generate plan using the function name directly, or should you generate something like in natural language and then have a translator from this natural language into the function names. So I do think there's a lot of studies around that, and I felt like a lot of excitement around agent is great. But I also like feel like a lot of the excitement nowadays is about like, hey, how to build an agent very quickly, right? Like, hey, this is framework to build an agent in like 5 minutes. And I'm always like, okay, build an agent and then what? Like, but what do we use that agent for, right? So I feel like I think like maybe we can have some of that energy directed toward like understanding, like how do we properly structure these agents or like use that, like yeah, like understanding how it uses tool, like how to the planning language, or like just how to get the agent do things like more correctly.
It's going back to the initial question around agents versus LLMs and tools, or does agents equal LLMs and tools? I think that it is true that a lot of that is kind of semantics and not all that interesting, but an interesting potential aspect of that is if you know you want to explain to someone who knows LLMs and knows tools, what opportunities there are in thinking about some broader universe of agents, and if that requires new skills or new things to learn, or um, new approaches. uh, how do you think about it from that perspective? Meaning, if you've got someone who knows LLMs and tools pretty well, and is coming to you and says, is there anything that I need to learn beyond that to work with agents, or to take advantage of agentic systems? What are the things that you talk about?
So I think the question of like whether agents is just LM plus tool is the same as the questions whether a car is just a battery plus wheels. Like yeah, you can have like on this component, but is that enough for you to like want to buy it. So there are a lot of other things about it. First, we have to like first like package it into a product that people want to buy, or like have it like being able to solve problems like efficiently. So first we have an LM can execute a lot of tools. And it's just like imagine you just keep on calling, execute like calling maybe like open a million web pages and I send out like 10,000 API calls, right? It can do that very well. But then what problems will that LM plus tool can solve for you? Or like how easy is that for the users to able to like specify a task and then get back the result? Like how can that like be integrated seamlessly into the workflow? And then how do you as a agent developer get all of this feedback from users and continue to improve the system? So I do think like that is a big question. So definitely I could say it's like LM is like the brain. So like do all the planning and like reflections, and the tools is just like how it can execute and like perform actions to like accomplish a task. But it's a whole ecosystem around this. Like you have to like do system design, you have to think about like maybe supplement it with memory, think about like how to evaluate the agent different failure modes, like put guardrails around it, because the more tools the agent has access to, the more dangerous in a way it can be. I don't want to say it's dangerous because it can scare a lot of people, but this thing is just like, yeah, like we just need a higher level of security. If say like if you have like an LM that can, I say, read email versus an LM that can send email, or if we have an LM that can like read you, like tell you the bank balance versus an LM that can like transfer money out of your account. So like just some more action you can give the LMs, the more guardrails, and the more we can think through like how to catch the failure, make sure that things just don't go wrong. And I do think just like that's a lot of work around that, and it's way more than just like LM plus tools.
When you see folks approaching, getting started with agents or even kind of this broader picture of AI engineering, like what are the things that get people caught up? What are the mistakes that you see people making kind of over and over again?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So I feel I have a lot of thoughts about it, but I have to be careful not to make it sound like I think everyone's an idiot. Yeah. So I do think that engineering as a field, engineering field is still pretty new, and with anything new, we're still learning like how to do things right. We're still coming up with understand best practices and build out the right level of abstraction. So I clearly think there's a lot of like some making mistake is like inevitable, right? And that's how we learn. So there's certain like mistakes or like common pitfalls I see. So first of all, one thing is that a lot of time people start way too complex too early. Right, like first of all, you hear some new framework coming out. It's like, oh, let's try it out. Let's build an agent, right? Let's just, I know,
Multi
right? Like,
agent.
yeah, and it's very easy to get caught up in this like like the layers instead of like thinking about what you actually want to do. So first of all, like before like using a framework that's like help that abstracts away all the API calls, or like provide with like some pre-built prompts. Maybe just try out like call the model directly, write their own prompts, and just try to see how things go. And because like actually during the process doing research for my book, I actually went into the code bases, a lot of like popular frameworks, and I saw a bunch of them built in prompts, and a lot of them have typos. Because so we need to understand this like application sorry, the framework developers can make mistake as well. And a lot of time using the right tools can help, but like using the tool too early can introduce like unnecessary. I just learned how to say nes- necessary necessary complexities, and like can hide away mistakes. So I think it's good to just understand how things work underneath the hood really, really well before introduce different levels of like tools to make it easier. Um, that might change the future though. Okay, I do think like over time, like we have like much trust in frameworks, or like we have best practices, and then we can trust as like these frameworks and are reliable and do what expected. Then I think it's like it's okay to then start more complex, because like nobody nowadays actually like write assembly code anymore, right? We do go like up the level of abstraction over time. Another example is just like a lot of people when they do RAG, retrieval augmented generations, people like start with like vector search, like using like very complex vector databases and like generic embeddings and stuff. Whereas you can do something like a lot similar, just like term-based retrieval, like BM, like or like something very old school system like BM25. It's actually really really hard to beat. Um, Another thing is just like that I get a lot of like debate about is like how much AI knowledge do you need to start building applications. So in a way, like with engineering, there is a lot less ML. Like before, if you wanted to build an AI application, you would need to build some models yourself. But nowadays, you just access this pre-built model, right? And it's an incredible thing, because now like anyone, like it's like a really lower the entry barrier for people to like access AI and use AI for their needs. And I do think that you can do a lot, like starting out with it. But I do think it's like to use it well, or like to like avoid headaches. Then some understanding of how AI works underneath the hood can help you go a long way. So like first, like it can have you explain some like weird behaviors of AI. For example, like understanding like how AI they sample their responses, right? Can help you like maybe understand more about like how why hallucinations happens or like why the AI changes its responses. Or it can have you come up with strategy to like improve the model responses by like changing different ways of like the model like sample responses, right? Or maybe you can learn from the past. So for example, like hallucination again. Um, there's like a subfield of like NLPs that been study something like um, why the models output things that are not consistent with what's given to it. For example, like the question like, hey, I want some AI to like summarize this book. Why is the summary not consistent with the book where it comes up with like things that's like not in the book, right? So that field is like called like natural language inference, or like textual entailment. So like in textual entailment, you have a hypothesis, right? And they have a statement. And you want to determine whether this statement is consistent or can be derived from the hypothesis. First one has the hypothesis of like all fruits are tasty. And if you say like apple is tasty, then you can say, okay, this statement is consistent with this because apple is a fruit. But just saying this like married like apple, then it's not like you can't really derive. It's neutral, like it's not related to this. So it's very useful in the context of LLM. So for example, like you give it some documents about like the company policies, and the answers is like, can it be derived like from this document? Like, is this like consistent, or is this like, or is this like contradictory, or is this like something you cannot sufficiently derive from it? So I think it's just having some like understanding, basic knowledge of ML theory fundamental can be very, very helpful.
No, I think the opposite question is also kind of interesting now, in that code generation has made coding so accessible. I think, it's tempting to ask, like, how far can I get without really understanding engineering? But I also find that to really use code gen tools and get over some of the humps and barriers that you're presented when you use those tools, you have to understand at least a little bit about abstractions and like common refactoring patterns and things like that, or else you end up in a corner. Um, so it's like it's I guess it's both the AI and the engineering, and they're kind of inseparable in the sense that you need both of them if you're going to build anything more than kind of a toy. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of it, you also need to understand the problem you're trying to solve and your users. Yeah. As you brought up the question about coding, I think it's really interesting questions that come up is just like, so AI is quite good at coding. And they have, people wonder, it's like, is there still any point in learning how to code? Or like, will there still be software engineers in the future? You pretty saw the questions, right? I'm not sure if you like thought like thought about the answers, like well, what the answer would be there. But I was watching this a webinar from Stanford, from the chair of curriculum for the CS department, and like in Andrew at Stanford, about like the future of like CS educations. And something they said I really really like is that like the job of software engineering, as a job of software engineer is not just writing code. Like the act of writing code itself is actually like pretty manual and like not that exciting. But the task of like understanding the problems, coming up with solutions, like it's a lot more exciting. So I think it's like just because AI can like write code well doesn't mean that it can solve problems well. And I think it really depends on us like decide like what kind of things that we want to do. Like do you want to be an software engineer who just know how to write code well, or someone who can build a beautiful or wonderful software solutions and like to address like real world problems. And it might need to start with us understanding the problems that we want to solve.
So you were talking about mistakes that folks are making. Are there others on your list?
Okay, so one things that I see is that like not spending enough time crafting the guideline for what you want the model to do. So a lot of time we interact with AI by giving the
Meaning a
prompt
spec
instruction.
going in, or what you
Yeah,
expect
like
your
the
outputs to be, or
yeah,
all of the
both.
above?
Yeah, all of the above, like the instructions. So we want AI to act in a certain way, like to exhibit like certain behaviors, and we need to like tell AI what we want to do. And so for example, I can give it like examples of like, hey, like you wanted to respond, like this is a good response, this is a bad response. So like do more is a good response and do less of bad responses, right? And a lot of times it's really hard to define what a good response would be like. So a very interesting case study from LinkedIn. So they were building a chatbot to help candidate um, prepare for a job, right? And the candidate can ask a question of like, "Am I a good fit for this job?" And they found I was like, "Correct is not the same as good." So the bot my response with like, "You're a terrible fit." So it's correct, but it's not helpful for the candidate, right? So they need to understand more on like what does the candidate want to hear, like what is it going to need. So candidate like maybe they need pointers on like how to improve their profile so they can be a good fit. Or another example from a company that I can't name because confidential, but so they were like trying to build a bot to help like summarize meetings transcript. And at the beginning, they taught us like, okay, we need to think about like how long the summary should be. Should it be like 3 sentences? Should it be like 10 sentences? Right? They taught us what the users wanted to know, but actually not that. The users actually care. Like they mostly care about like what action items they have, like what is like timely, urgent. So a lot of it is just like you need to understand like what users want and like put that into like good instructions and guideline, and then AI can I help you with that?
It makes me think about eval as a challenge also, because if you aren't able to clearly articulate, what is a good response versus what is a bad response, then you're not going to be able to formalize. That's like a prerequisite to formalizing that into a set of evaluation, criteria and tooling.
And that is incredibly hard because I'm not sure if you like. I think it's like even I sometimes like if I wanted to do something, I'm just like, oh my god, I have to explain very well. Like say, let's say example, like you want to create an essay, right? It's like, hey, this is a good essay, this is a bad essay. It's not that simple. We need to come up with a lot of criteria, like very like examples as well, and
Yeah,
it can
whenever I
get
think
like
about this as a problem,
hard.
it
Yeah.
makes me think about Andre Karpathy's, software 2.0 thing. Like the reason why ML was interesting was because like we couldn't write the rules to teach, to get from a cat face to a class based on, the features of the pixels, right? And the same is true in like, evaluating text responses. Those rules are just really hard to write. And so we need to use like tooling in order to, I guess that both speaks to the interest in AI as a judge, but also the need to put a lot of thought into, how you as a person think about um, the, quality assessment of whatever your output is.
Definitely. I do think that we maybe another really pitfall is that people don't spend enough time thinking about evaluation as they should. Yeah. It's just I do think that evaluation is the biggest bottleneck to AA adoption nowadays.
Are there things that you've seen people doing that are working well? Is there a silver bullet, for evaluation beyond the kind of thinking hard about the problem that we've been talking about so far? Or is there a path, a next level of detail, or if you were instructing the engineers as a planner, like how to think about kind of walking through the evaluation process, like, what's step one, what's step two?
Step one, for me personally, I s- so you know what is quite tedious, so I can see why people don't do it, but I just spend a lot of time just like looking at the data. So first of all, like you maybe like spend like for me like every day I would look at like certain numbers of like samples. So like don't be afraid to like involve human in the loop and like just looking at the data. I think it's some interesting treat. I think Greg Brockman was saying it's like manually like looking at data is one of the most like low predict but like high value activities you can do. Um, yeah. Also like try to like systemize things because yes, eyeballing is important, like just looking at the data, but also like try to come with systematic ways. Like don't just like rely too much on vibe check. You know, like you need to be able to like benchmark the progress over time, setting some concrete numbers. Yeah, being so like understand your tools you're using for evaluate. So for example, a lot of people nowadays use AI as a judge, but like an LM judge is not like static, right? Like it depends on the model, it can change the prompt. And in some a lot of teams I've seen is just like some teams build the AI judge, like running the prompt, and some other teams use the judge. And I would say is like so a team like someone will come to me and say, "Hey, we have this score of like 90% on faithfulness, for example." And I'm just like, so what is the prompt you use to like to score that faithfulness? And they were like, I don't know because somebody else built it. And I was like, like you have too much. I feel like AI is great, but sometimes I'm afraid we have too much trust in it. You know, like we just need to like understand more on like how things work.
Related to your earlier comment about diving into tools and getting abstracted away from how things are actually working.
Yeah, I'm sure maybe it will change the future as the field evolves and we have more reliable tools. But I think we're still at the phase where still like people are still learning and things are still like getting to shape. So having more, being a little bit more paranoid is probably a good thing right now.
We talked about how you wanted to avoid anything related to ops for the title of the book, but you spent a lot of time thinking about ML ops and ML systems in earlier times. Like, how are you seeing folks operationalize LLM systems and agentic systems? Are there patterns forming yet?
I do like operations. I have a lot of respect for operations people. They are pretty like my favorite people, one of my favorite people to hang out with. Um, yeah, so I think that we can definitely learn a lot from like the operation world, like especially like the SRE folks about like how to make things reliable. And I trust me, like reliability is one of those things that we really need to get better with AI. So like a lot of those like how they do things, how they like come up with metrics. So first of all, like two metrics that I thought was like very important is like first of all like time to detections, like if something fail, like how long do you detect it? How long until you can detect it? And the second is like time to address issue. Okay, I'm pretty um butchering the name, and my brain is just like, "We I just came back from like Asia, and like I'm still jet lagged." But like, how long it takes for you to like after you take the issue, like how long does it take for you to like fix the issue? So I think it's like a lot of AI system today, like AI, like especially generative AI, they fail silently. Like the responses can sound like okay, coherent, but they can be like lacking information, hallucinating, or like containing some like weird things. So and people might just like and especially something so scary about like factual inconsistency is that like me, for example, me as a user, right? I ask AI a question because I don't know it. So like when it gives back to me something that's wrong, I don't know if it's wrong, right? I might even trust it because that's precisely why I asked in the first place. So it's really so I do think it's like having a more consistent way, systematic way to like define just different kind of failures, how to detect them, and I started like getting more rigorous about like trying to measure and address them. It's like it's extremely important.
Are you seeing a lot of activity around open source models or open weights models, llama and the like local execution of models? Are the folks that you are working with and talking to using a lot of those, or primarily using the models provided by the larger companies?
I think that definitely changed a lot, like last year. That I see more and more people using open source models. I definitely like. I think like open sourcing is great for the community. we do need to think about like incentives, right? Like, say if you have the best model out there in the world, like why would you open source it? So I think it's like open source make a lot of sense from like users perspective or from the one piece level perspective, but like we need to think about like the incentive for the people to want to make things open source. And I think that's something we are not quite that good at. So right now, like we do rely on like big corporation to open source, but at the same time, like it's incredible the teams are doing it, but at the same time, like there's no guarantee that they will continue doing it. So I do think it's like open source, especially with the introductions of very powerful open source models recently. It does really help the community accelerate development. We see a lot of people like more willing to like try out use AI because you don't have to like, because now they can deploy this model into their own systems, so they can do like governance better, like all that stuff. Yeah, so I do think it's a big boon to the community and the industry. I hope that we can continue with that in the future.
How about synthetic data? Are you seeing a lot of synthetic data applications in the
Yeah,
context of agents and LLMs?
definitely, like huge. I think like if you're interested in synthetic data, I really like this paper. I like the Llama 3 paper. I think it's an amazing paper. You should just read it. Like if you have, I'm sure a lot of people already read it. But like if you haven't, like do check it out. It has some really good sections on data synthesis. So like they were able to use AI to like synthesize like I believe it's 3.7 million samples for like instruction fine tuning. Um, and one thing I really like about this paper is that not only it explains how they synthesize data, but also like how to verify data. Because now there's a challenge like, hey, we can like generate any data, but how do you know that this data is good, right? Like how do you know that like because like you know like the importance of data quality. If you train a model with bad data, the model is gonna be worse. I realized that like on the data verifications. So they have a few very clever techniques, and that's what I love about like working as in AI nowadays because it's really creative. Like you can come with like a lot of like it's like I don't know, it's just so creative. There's so much creativity in there. So first of all, a lot of the example involving code because like naturally with code you can like have a good way to validate whether the code runs or not and whether it's outputs everything. So they have like code generation. They also have like back translations with coding. So for example, like, if they start with like a problem, like a description of what the code is gonna be like, and then they generate the code, and then they use LM to like generate documentation for generate code. And now they compare the original document with the AI generated documentations. And I can see like, okay, if it's good, if it's matching, then the code is probably good. So like a lot of like creativity like that in data verifications. Yeah, I'm very bullish on synthetic data.
Well, we're speaking at the beginning of 2025. What are your predictions for the year? What are you excited about, and where do you think the field is going to be if we were to talk at the end of 2025 or beginning of 2026?
Well, one thing I'm excited about is more dramas for OpenAI. It's like quite exciting. What else? I want to see more applications from the community, from the industry. I think it's like last year we seen I kept hearing that a lot of like one of the biggest challenge for industry, like for enterprise to adopt AI applications is like security, governance, right? Compliance. So I hope that we see more like law around AI will become evolving so we have more clarity so like people can feel confident in like deploying these applications. I do see an increased capabilities of AIs using tools, like maybe what you call like agent. Maybe they have more framework around like how to build agents and how to evaluate them. I'm also like expect a lot of like I'm so like um a never ending questions. It's like compute. So I'm very excited to see more progress there. Yeah. Do you know what
Compute progress can be slow. Are you expecting big shifts in the upcoming year?
big shift? Like what kind of shifts could there
How
be
do you
with
define big? Is
compute?
that the question?
Yeah. So I feel like Nvidia stocks will likely continue to fluctuate and giving people who own it like a lot of like heart attacks. I'm not jealous. I think it's interesting. I would love to see more of like chips designs, architectures. I think GPUs have been around for a long time. Could be very exciting. Maybe I see more. Yeah, I think like the computer's interesting. I think like a friend was asking me this like, do you ever think that we will reach the point where compute is no longer the bottleneck? And it's interesting questions because like will we ever reach the point like when compute is just not like important, you know? Like I feel like if we can produce more compute, but then there will always be more applications. Like we have the whole thing of like audio, speech, images, generation, videos, and they's gonna consume a lot of like compute. So I felt like compute will continue to be important for a while.
That's why everyone's talking about quantum.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that is extremely interesting.
I think that's a lot longer out than people are thinking, though.
That's what people said about AI 5 years ago, right? Yeah, I think the world is interesting. I do feel very fortunate to be living in this time period of time. I feel like I was thinking, I'm like, I was looking back like on the other period of time. Like, is there any period of time I would rather live in? So I probably no. Like, I feel like as a woman, like for the first, like, I don't know, like before the 1900s, pretty sucks to be a woman. So I don't know, like that's just definitely out. And then like isn't okay, I feel like I'm gonna go into this pretty not a worthwhile discussion right here.
Well, Chip, it's been wonderful catching up, and we can take the rest of the time period discussion offline. But it was great talking a little bit about the book and what you've been up to recently, and hearing some of your thoughts on agents.
Yeah, no, it's been great chatting with you. Thank you so much for having me here, and I'm sorry if I ramble on too much. Feel free to cut those.
Not at all.
But yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much, Chip.